72 hours ago, something happened in Baghdad that the Western press covered into paragraphs and then moved on from. They called it a regional coordination meeting. They framed it as routine diplomacy. They buried the details under ceasefire speculation and Iran nuclear headlines. That was a mistake, because what actually took place inside a secured compound in Baghdad's international zone on May 9, 2026 was not a ceasefire discussion. It was not a humanitarian coordination session. It was not even primarily about Iraq, what it was based on a four-page confidential summary from Iraqi national intelligence that has been circulating among regional analysts for the last 72 hours was a trilateral architectural session. Iran, Iraq, China, 11 hours behind closed doors. No American officials, no NATO observers, no Western cameras, and the United States Embassy, sitting less than 3 kilometers away, found out about it from a Reuters wire report published for 10 hours. After every participant had already left the country, let that settle in. I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes walking you through what was actually agreed to in that room, why it makes existing Western sanctions architecture functionally obsolete, and why the 90 days ahead may permanently answer the question of whether American influence in the Middle East gets reformed or simply replaced. Stay with me. This matters more than the headlines suggest. Start with location, because where this meeting happened is not incidental, it is the entire message. Baghdad sits at one of the most consequential geographic intersections on the planet. East, Iran, sharing not just a border but deep ethnic, religious, and economic tissue with Iraq's Shia majority. West, a degraded but still operational American military and diplomatic presence, embedded through 2 decades of war and reconstruction. And increasingly, from the north and northeast, China arriving not with troops but with contracts, cables, and capital. According to the International Energy Agency's April 2026 report, Iraq now pumps 4.2 million barrels of oil per day. 91% of government revenue flows from those exports. And here is the number that reframes everything. 73% of Iraqi oil exports now go to Asian markets. China alone absorbs 46% of Iraq's total crude output. That is not diversification, that is realignment expressed in barrels. The meeting was held in the Republican Palace complex, the same location where Coalition Provisional Authority Administrator Paul Bremer once governed a post-invasion Iraq from behind American authority. The Iraqi officials who chose that venue understood exactly what they were doing. That building was once the operational headquarters of American occupation. On May 9, 2026, it was used to plan American exclusion. Symbolism in diplomacy is never accidental. Now, the delegations, because who governments send tells you more about what was actually being negotiated than any official press release ever will. The Iranian side, Tehran, did not send its foreign minister. It did not send parliamentary goodwill ambassadors. It sent Admiral Ali Reza Tangsiri, commander of the Urg Navy, and Dr. Reza Degani, deputy foreign minister for economic diplomacy, a naval commander and an economist who specializes in sanctions evasion architecture. Admiral Tangsiri has publicly described the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, and the northern Arabian Sea as a single integrated strategic theater requiring coordinated defense. His presence in Baghdad means the conversation included maritime security, shared naval intelligence, and likely real-time monitoring of American carrier group movements through jointly operated platforms. Dr. Degani's presence tells the financial story. He personally oversees Iran's non-dollar trade mechanisms, the barter systems, the cryptocurrency settlement trails, the layered workarounds that have allowed Iran to continue exporting oil despite what the U.S. Treasury calls maximum pressure. His job is building the piping that makes sanctions irrelevant. According to reporting from Middle East Eye, corroborated by two sources inside the Iraqi Prime Minister's office, the Iranian delegation brought technical schematics to Baghdad, not negotiating papers. Schematics, specifically, the blueprints for a proposed fiber optic network running Basra to Baghdad to Tehran, purpose-built to carry encrypted financial transaction data over infrastructure physically isolated from any Western monitored network. They are not asking to reform the existing financial system, they are building a parallel one. The Chinese side, Beijing sent Vice Minister of Commerce Wang Xiaowen and Admiral Dong Jun, commander of the People's Liberation Army Navy South Sea Fleet. Look at the structural symmetry. Economic Minister plus Naval Admiral, mirroring the Iranian delegation exactly. That alignment was not coincidental. It reflects months, possibly years of coordinated pre-planning between Tehran and Beijing before a single official sat down in Baghdad. Wang Xiaowen has personally overseen $73 billion in Chinese infrastructure investment across Iraq, Iran, and Syria since 2019. He does not attend meetings to discuss hypotheticals. He attends to finalize. Admiral Dong's South Sea Fleet has conducted 17 freedom of navigation exercises in the Arabian Sea since January 2026, often within visual range of American carrier strike groups. His presence signals that what was discussed included naval coordination not as a future possibility, but as an operational near-term arrangement. Bloomberg reported on May 10th, citing two sources with direct knowledge, that the Chinese delegation tabled a draft 15-year memorandum of understanding. China finances the construction of a deepwater port at Qasr, Iraq's primary maritime gateway, in exchange for long-term crude supply contracts denominated in yuan. With an option to settle 20% of the contract value in gold held in Shanghai vaults, read that again slowly. No dollars, no SWIFT, no exposure to American secondary sanctions. Iraq gets support that multiplies its export capacity fivefold. China locks in long-term energy supply and another regional partner integrated into yuan-denominated trade. Iran gets a sanctions-resistant neighbor with upgraded port infrastructure that can transship Iranian goods under Iraqi flags of convenience. Three parties gain, one system loses. The petrodollar architecture that has anchored American financial hegemony since 1974. The official Iraqi government statement, released 18 hours after the meeting ended, described it as a routine trilateral working group on regional development cooperation. Routine, an 11-hour closed session involving two admirals, a Chinese trade minister, and senior Iranian economic strategists. Routine. The language is designed to sedate Western reaction, while the actual agreements are drafted in technical annexes that will not be released publicly. But Iraqi parliamentary sources speaking to Al Monitor have identified three draft agreements, each carrying 30-day implementation timelines. First, a security cooperation framework, authorizing Iranian and Chinese military advisors to train Iraqi coastal defense units. Second, a digital payments infrastructure project linking Baghdad, Tehran, and Chinese payment systems through a dedicated blockchain network, the technical realization of the fiber optic financial architecture the Iranians brought schematics for. Third, an energy transit arrangement formalizing the routing of Iranian natural gas through Iraqi pipelines to Turkish and European markets, with Iraq collecting an estimated $2 billion annually in transit fees. That third agreement deserves particular attention. For 8 years, the United States has blocked Iranian gas exports through sanctions and sustained diplomatic pressure on every potential transit state. Iraq, a country where 3,500 American troops remain stationed today, is now preparing to formally become that transit corridor. Iranian gas will reach European markets through American garrison territory, using infrastructure financed in part by China, priced outside the dollar system. This is not defiance for its own sake. This is what structural realignment looks like when it matures, not declarations, not ultimatums, just architecture, quietly built and suddenly irreversible. The Western media has a template for covering Iraq, the balanced narrative. Iraq walks the tightrope between Iran and America. Iraq hedges. Iraq plays both sides. Baghdad is perennially caught in the middle. That template is no longer accurate. It describes a transitional period that has already ended. When 73% of your exports flow east, when Chinese firms are building your power grid, when Iranian military networks are embedded in your security forces, when your central bank requires evasion software to process basic transactions without triggering American sanctions flags you are not balancing, you have already crossed. The Biden-era State Department, responding to reports of the Baghdad meeting, issued this statement: "The United States respects Iraq's sovereignty and encourages all regional dialogue that promotes stability and prosperity." Parse that carefully. There is no policy content in that sentence. There is no mechanism, no response, no leverage being announced. It is the language of an actor who was not in the room and lacks the tools to change what was decided there. It is diplomatic code for managed exclusion. Europe's reaction was more revealing still. According to Politico Europe, French and German foreign ministry officials held emergency consultations on May 11th not to strategize a counter-response, but to discuss how to ensure European access to the Chinese financial infrastructure now penetrating Iraq. They are not trying to block the new system, they are applying for membership. History does not repeat, but it does have a habit of rhyming in ways that embarrass people who weren't paying attention. Consider the Peloponnesian War 431–400 BC. Athens and Sparta, the two dominant powers of the ancient Greek world, locked in a 27-year war of mutual attrition. Athens controlled the seas, Sparta controlled the land. Neither could deliver a decisive blow. Both bled resources, manpower, and credibility into a conflict that exhausted the entire Hellenic world. Who won? Persia, which stayed largely outside the fighting, extended just enough financial support to Sparta at the critical juncture to tip the final balance, then extracted territory and tribute from the winning side. Persia did not conquer anyone. It financed patience, and patience, when your rivals are grinding each other down, is the most powerful force in geopolitics. Now map the current structure onto that template. The United States and Iran have been locked in escalating confrontation since 1979. The Quincy Institute estimates American military presence in the region costs $54 billion annually. The Congressional Research Service estimates Iranian sanctions evasion costs stare on $60 billion per year in foregone revenue. Both sides are bleeding into a confrontation neither can win through force alone. And China buys discounted Iranian oil, signs infrastructure deals with American allies, positions itself as the neutral investor, the patient partner, the power that never asks you to choose sides only to accept capital. Washington is Athens, Tehran is Sparta, Beijing is Persia, and the Baghdad meeting was the moment regional powers formalized their tilt toward the patient third party. There is no comfortable middle ground here. Washington faces three distinct trajectories, and only one of them is currently politically viable, which is part of the problem. Path 1: Economic re engagement. The United States competes for influence the way China competes through patient capital, long-term infrastructure investment, and sanctions reform that gives regional partners flexibility. This requires bipartisan congressional commitment, executive tolerance for policy nuance, and the willingness to accept that American firms will be operating in environments where Chinese competitors already have a 5-year head start. In the current political climate in Washington, this is theoretically possible and practically unlikely. Path 2: Manage strategic drawdown. Washington accepts that its regional role is shifting from dominant hegemon to significant stakeholder, reduces its military footprint to core missions, focuses diplomatic leverage on preventing outright hostile regional dominance rather than micromanaging alignment, and uses economic tools selectively rather than as the primary instrument of coercion. This is sustainable. It is realistic. It preserves the interests that actually matter. It is roughly what serious foreign policy strategists across the political spectrum have been recommending since 2015. Path 3: Accelerated irrelevance by default. Washington maintains existing sanctions architecture intact, continues treating any regional engagement with China or Iran as an act requiring punishment, demands binary loyalty from partners whose structural economic dependencies make that demand impossible to honor, and watches as country after country formalizes exactly the kind of arrangements that unfolded in Baghdad, each time with less American input, more institutional acceptance of exclusion, and diminishing ability to reverse course. Path 3 requires no decisions. It is what happens when the domestic political incentives all point toward rigidity, when it is easier to maintain sanctions than reform them, easier to frame complexity as betrayal than adapt strategy to changed facts, easier to call the Baghdad meeting routine than to reckon with what it represents. The architecture being built in closed government compounds right now: fiber optic financial networks, yuan-denominated port contracts, gas transit corridors through American garrison territory, will not wait for Washington to process its political constraints. 3 questions to carry forward from this analysis. Can the United States compete economically with a rising power that attaches no political conditions to its infrastructure investment? How many more Baghdad meetings need to occur before sanctions policy is reformed to include realistic alternatives rather than simply closing off existing options? What does American influence actually mean in a region where economic gravity increasingly flows through channels that are dollar-free by design? These are not rhetorical provocations. They are the structuring questions of the next decade of American foreign policy, and the answers being written right now, not in Washington briefing rooms, but in Baghdad compounds, Shanghai vaults, and fiber optic schematics quietly changing hands between admirals. The next 90 days will validate or overturn everything laid out in this analysis. Either the agreements reached on May 9th move toward implementation and we begin to see the structural effects in energy markets, currency hedging costs, and payment processing infrastructure, or something disrupts the timeline and the architecture. Stalls: we will track every development, we will explain what it actually means before the consensus version catches up. That is the work. If this kind of analysis matters to you, subscribe, share it with someone who needs the unvarnished version, and leave your read on which of those 3 paths Washington ends up on. The comments on that question alone are worth a follow-up breakdown. We'll see you in the next one.